The fundamental delusion that dictates the trajectory of human failure is the belief that our struggles are a direct byproduct of our external environment. We look at our jobs, our financial deficits, our relationships, and our socioeconomic standing, pointing at them as the definitive authors of our stagnation. But if you want to understand the mechanics of high performance, whether in the financial, markets, or in the arena of personal mastery, you must accept a radical, objective truth. Your reality is not a reflection of the world around you. It is a flawless, unblemished mirror of your internal psychological framework. Every action you execute on the canvas of reality does not originate from your physical hands or your spoken words. It is born in the quiet, often unmonitored architecture of your mind. A single thought, allowed to linger without surveillance, transitions into an evaluation. That evaluation swiftly hardens into a definitive decision, which inevitably forces a physical action. And that action is replicated under the same psychological conditions, mutates into a habit, and those habits systematically construct the matrix of your future. To think that you can discipline your external output without first imposing a ruthless structure of discipline upon your internal thinking is a psychological impossibility. If you lack the mechanisms to govern the erratic nature of your thoughts, you will perpetually remain a casualty of external forces. The battle for success is never fought on the outside. It is won or lost in the internal environment, within the silent chambers of your own consciousness, which is why we must dissect how to transition from a state of mental drifting to a state of absolute cognitive precision, recognizing that the human mind, left to its own devices, will naturally seek the path of least resistance. Which brings us to the core issue of why so many individuals possessing immense baseline talent and staggering raw potential consistently fail to materialize their dreams, drifting aimlessly through life, because they are losing a quiet, invisible war against their own mental programming, a war where the enemy is not a lack of opportunity, but a lack of psychological alignment with the demands of their goals. The core mechanism of the internal battle. This internal warfare is characterized by distinct, predatory psychological forces: procrastination, fear, doubt, and the most insidious of them all, the craving for comfort. Comfort is a highly dangerous mental state because it does not announce itself as an enemy. Instead, it masquerades as a rational friend, whispering subtle, logical justifications into your consciousness, telling you to ease your pace, suggesting that postponing your execution by a single day is a trivial concession that will not impact your ultimate destination. This is where the average mind capitulates, failing to realize that the mind is a highly sophisticated learning machine that records every single concession as a precedent for future behavior. When you negotiate with your goals, you are essentially training your brain to accept substandard performance as your default operating system. Mark Douglas emphasized that elite performers operate under an entirely different set of psychological axioms. They understand with absolute clarity that small, seemingly inconsequential choices possess an exponential compounding effect. There are no neutral actions in the human psyche. Every micro-discipline strengthens your mental resolve, while every micro-excuse reinforces your psychological vulnerability. Success is not a massive, singular event that occurs because the universe aligned in your favor. It is a structure built brick by brick, one disciplined, uncompromised decision at a time. True discipline is defined as the psychological capacity to consciously choose what you desire most over what your emotional body wants right now. When you begin to actively train your mind to operate from this perspective, you effectively alter your cognitive chemistry. Your capacity to maintain sustained attention expands, your self-reliance solidifies, and your behavioral output aligns naturally with your objective metrics, allowing you to stop reacting to the volatile, temporary emotional currents of the moment and start executing permanent decisions based on logic, strategy, and long-term vision, which is the foundational shift required to transform your mind from a chaotic liability into a highly calibrated asset capable of navigating extreme uncertainty without fracturing. Overcoming the dictatorship of temporary feelings. To achieve this level of mental sovereignty, you must dismantle the dictatorship of your temporary feelings, because emotions are inherently volatile, short-sighted, and designed to protect you from perceived discomfort rather than propel you toward exceptional achievement. When you allow a passing wave of fatigue, anxiety, or uninspired emotion to dictate whether or not you honor your commitments, you are allowing the weakest part of your biology to govern the highest aspirations of your intellect. A disciplined mind operates on a system of non-negotiation. When a goal is set and a strategy is mapped out, the execution of that strategy becomes a mandatory metric, entirely independent of how you feel on any given morning. This shift in perspective requires you to stop viewing your mind as a singular entity and instead view it as a corporate structure where your conscious, rational intellect must act as the undisputed leader. If the leader is weak, hesitant, and easily swayed by the complaints of the workforce, which, in this analogy, represents your primitive impulses and emotional excuses, the entire enterprise collapses into instability and confusion. Most individuals are living in a state of cognitive anarchy, where their minds are training them to be reactive, fearful, and compliant to comfort, rather than them training their minds to be sharp, resilient, and forward-moving. The first real responsibility of your life is not to attempt to manipulate or control the external variables of the world, but to establish absolute command over your internal landscape. Every thought you deliberately entertain functions as a psychological suggestion. If that suggestion is accepted by your awareness, it solidifies into a belief system. Once a belief system is established, your brain actively filters reality to find data that validates that belief. Meaning that if you consistently entertain thoughts of self-doubt, limitation, and valid excuses, your mind will flawlessly construct a reality where failure is not only logical, but mathematically inevitable. The psychology of strict cognitive filtration. This brings us to the profound realization that, while you cannot always prevent negative, disempowering thoughts from entering your awareness, you possess absolute sovereignty over whether those thoughts are permitted to remain there. Mental discipline begins at the gateway of perception. It is the practice of strict cognitive filtration, conscious refusal to entertain weak thoughts, the immediate rejection of excuses, and the total abandonment of self-imposed limitations. What you allow to occupy space within your mind will eventually manifest as a physical reality in your life, because your actions cannot deviate from the boundaries of your self-conception. Consider the archetype of an individual who has achieved total mastery over their internal environment. When high-pressure situations arise, they do not succumb to panic. When obstacles present themselves, they do not interpret them as a signal to quit. When negative internal monologues begin to surface, they do not grant them an audience. Instead, they respond to chaos with objective clarity, emotional neutrality, and deliberate control, altering their life trajectories, not because the external world miraculously became easier, but because they upgraded their internal capacity to handle difficulty. The strongest individuals on this planet are not those who exist in a vacuum devoid of struggle. They are those who consistently win the silent, grueling battle within their own minds every single day. If your objective is to attain high-level success in any competitive or creative field, your primary point of focus must pivot inward. You must recognize that discipline does not originate in your hands or manifest spontaneously in your habits. It is a mental state that must be cultivated before the external results can ever appear. Your mind is constantly active, perpetually broadcasting a stream of internal dialogue, and your ultimate destiny depends entirely on which voice you choose to validate, the voice that pulls you backward into the safety of comfort, or the voice that commands you to step forward into the friction of growth, breaking the cycle of perpetual hesitation. The tragic reality is that the vast majority of people who are failing in their endeavors are not doing so because they lack a conceptual understanding of what is required to win. They know the exact actions necessary to alter their financial status, their physical health, and their intellectual capacity. Yet, they remain trapped in a perpetual cycle of hesitation, overthinking, and strategic delay. They are waiting for a mythical, perfect moment to begin, a moment when motivation will be high, energy will be abundant, and external conditions will be completely devoid of risk. That moment is a psychological mirage, an excuse generated by an untrained mind designed to protect its current state of equilibrium from the discomfort of change. While the untrained mind creates excuses, the disciplined mind creates execution. Understanding that tomorrow is the graveyard of human potential, a place where profound ideas and immense talents go to rot under the weight of just one more day. You must realize with absolute certainty that you are never trapped by your current situations or dictated by your past history. You are entirely governed by your present method of thinking. To break this paralysis, you must implement the principle of cognitive triage. You must explicitly accept that not every thought crossing your mind deserves your attention. Not every negative impulse deserves to be acted upon. Not every comfort-seeking emotion deserves your obedience. High-performance individuals treat their attention as their most valuable asset. They do not allow their focus to be fragmented by fleeting impulses or hijacked by trivial distractions. They choose their thoughts with the same meticulous care that a master trader uses to manage risk, understanding that discipline is built exclusively in the small, unglamorous moments where no one is watching, when you are exhausted but you still execute, when motivation is non-existent but your compliance to your standards remains absolute. Compounding micro-disciplines over intensity. Every micro-decision you execute when facing resistance acts as a vote for the person you are becoming. There is no neutral ground, and every time you capitulate to an excuse, you make that excuse structurally stronger for the next encounter. Conversely, every time you override an excuse with immediate, decisive action, you cause that mental weakness to atrophy, shaping your neural architecture through the pure power of repetition. You do not need a flawless, unshakable mind to initiate this process. You simply need a willing intellect that refuses to negotiate with its predefined objectives. True discipline is never about achieving a state of robotic perfection. It is about maintaining a relentless directional momentum. A disciplined mind experiences the exact same fear, the exact same laziness, and the exact same doubt as the average individual, but it chooses to execute anyway, recognizing that deliberate action is the definitive cure for cognitive dissonance and self-doubt. When you delay an action you know you must take, you inject a toxic dose of insecurity into your psyche. When you execute despite internal resistance, you build a profound, unshakable sense of self-trust. The ultimate quality of your life will never be determined by the depth of your theoretical knowledge or the grandiosity of your occasional bursts of inspiration. It will be determined exclusively by what you choose to do with absolute consistency. What you do occasionally does not shift the needle of your destiny. What you practice daily defines your identity and dictates your results. Success is a highly predictable pattern of small, unglamorous disciplines, repeated daily until they compound into massive, undeniable breakthroughs, meaning that greatness is never a product of isolated intensity, but rather the compounding byproduct of relentless consistency. The systems of identity and real growth. Consider the biological reality of a seed. It does not transform into a massive, rooted tree through a sudden, violent burst of growth. It develops through a silent, invisible, daily process of absorbing nutrients and pushing through the heavy resistance of the soil. It works in total darkness, without applause, without recognition, and without immediate visible confirmation of its progress. Yet because its internal system is consistent, its ultimate manifestation as a towering structure is mathematically guaranteed. This is precisely how human transformation occurs. You may not perceive radical shifts in your life after a single day of mental discipline, but within your psychological framework, something extraordinary is being forged. You are building character, expanding your frustration tolerance, refining your focus, and generating an invisible momentum that will eventually break through into visible reality. As popular performance psychology dictates, you do not rise to the level of your goals. You fall to the level of your systems. Your system is nothing more than your daily discipline. If your internal system is fragile, easily distracted, and dependent on emotional comfort, your external results will inevitably reflect that weakness. If your internal system is resilient, highly focused, and strictly governed by logic, your future will become an unshakable fortress. Analyze your daily habits with brutal objectivity. Are they actively funding your ultimate success, or are they financing your eventual bankruptcy? You are never standing still. You are either moving closer to your highest self or drifting further away from your potential, which is why excellence can never be viewed as an isolated act. It must be recognized as a deeply ingrained psychological habit, the ultimate sovereignty of a mastered mind. Commit to this internal standard especially when it is agonizingly slow, precisely when it feels heavy, and most importantly, when your primitive mind is screaming for a reprieve, because what feels like a grueling effort today will eventually become your effortless default state tomorrow. Excuses are the very materials used to construct a life of profound regret, a structure that people build slowly, quietly, and incrementally through thousands of tiny, unmonitored compromises, until they wake up to find their potential completely buried. Your life will never upgrade until your discipline upgrades. Mental strength is not an inherent trait bestowed upon a select few. It is a muscle developed through the repeated refusal to surrender to internal weakness. Talent without discipline is nothing more than a tragedy of wasted potential, and dreams, without consistent execution, are merely delusions that foster eventual bitterness. Your future self is not waiting for a change in luck, a shift in the economy, or a break in the weather. It is waiting for you to make a definitive, unyielding decision to step out of the comfort zone and into the arena of mental sovereignty. If you can successfully conquer the world inside of your own mind, the world outside of you will have no choice but to bow to your execution. If this deep dive into the psychology of mental discipline, high performance, and internal mastery resonated with you, ensure that you hit that subscribe button right now. We are fully committed to breaking down the exact mental frameworks, behavioral strategies, and psychological shifts required to take you from a state of distraction to a state of absolute cognitive dominance. Drop a comment below sharing the exact excuse you are choosing to eliminate from your life. Today, share this video with someone who needs to hear this unvarnished truth. Don't forget to turn on notifications so you never miss our deep dive content. Stay focused, stay disciplined, keep executing without negotiation. We will see you in the very next video.